Welcome back to these series of lectures on Western Civ. We're going to talk about ancient Sumer today, and we're going to break this up into a couple of lectures, at least two, maybe three. There's a lot of material here. I think it's ironic that here we're starting with the foundations of Western civilization, and where do we do it? In the modern day Middle East, in what is essentially Iraq today. Probably another good title for this would be Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, or Western civilization. Notice cradle, the birth metaphor. Let's do a couple of contexts first, and then significance. And then we'll go through this. We'll talk about civilization. We'll characterize ancient Sumer. We'll talk about geography. We'll talk about their cosmology, how they see the universe working and their role in that universe. We'll talk about the religious life of the ancient Sumerians and law. So there's a fair amount of material here. Let's start with context. What's the big picture here? A transition from Paleolithic man to Neolithic man. And again, we've talked about this. Paleolithic, small bands of hunter-gatherers. Transition to Neolithic is, of course, the agricultural or farming revolution. With farming and with domesticated plants and animals, you have much larger populations. You have people living in cities now. So we're going from rural to urban life. We're going from nomadic to sedentary life. Another context is of course, ancient civilizations. Sumeria there in Mesopotamia. Of course, you have the Indus River Valley civilizations in what today we'd call Pakistan and India. Also in China and Egypt along the Nile, and then of course in Middle America or Mesoamerica, Central America today. So you could put Sumer in that context as well, one of the ancient civilizations. Significances. Here we see the emergence of civilization, that is city life. Round figure, about 5,000 BCE. Another significance, does the creation of civilization, does it basically change the balance of nature? Is man now on top? Is he increasingly in control of nature? Has the West won the battle against nature, being able to control it and bring order out of chaos? Another significance, has man's ability to form civilizations, does it run parallel with man's ability to destroy the planet around him? This is something that we hear constantly in the news today. And you can see man's impact on the landscape going all the way back to ancient Sumer. Let's talk about civilization for a moment. Let's at least characterize it. We have monumental architecture, quite often in the form of temples. We have much larger populations, again, stored food. We have the beginning of writing. In ancient Sumer, this would have been the cuneiform, clay tablets, sharp-edged tools, making impressions in these tablets that can be read. You have the creation of laws, the beginning of science. Certainly, astronomy is one of the early sciences whereby priests and others would examine the celestial bodies and make deductions from that, the movement of planets and the sun and other things. You have the beginning of organized warfare. With civilization, you have a sense of continuity, a sense of rootedness to this place. The invention of the wheel. Of course, we have large domesticated animals in Southwest Asia, animals capable of pulling a cart. Therefore, the wheel becomes essential. You have the beginning of literature. Some of you may have heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. We'll talk about that today some, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about the Hebrews in our next lecture. Beginning of maps, again, trying to bring some order out of chaos. One of the earliest Sumerian cities was Uruk. This is east of the Euphrates. There in the deserts in southern Iraq, you can still see the outlines of the walls of this ancient city. You can still see the elevated ruins of an ancient temple. These, of course, are ziggurats, the Sumerian temples. Civilization, as I said earlier, we're increasingly moving from a rural to an urban life. Civilization pertains to cities, people grouping together in urban situations. Increased population, increased specialization, and as I mentioned earlier, obviously domesticated plants and animals. Continuing to characterize civilization, we find the first writing in Erbil, again, a city in modern-day Iraq, about 3,000 years ago, 3,000 years before the Common Era. And writing, of course, lends a sort of immortality, doesn't it? Because it can be read long after the death of the author. You see mud brick houses, mud brick walls in southern Iraq, small-scale life, face-to-face villages. You see metal casting begins. You see orchards planted. Again, the domestication of plants, and the invention of the wheel and the invention of the plow. Farming and the plow obviously go hand in hand. We further characterize civilization by saying that when you group large numbers of people together, there has to be a sense of toleration of difference. This, of course, is a problem we see throughout history, even in our own times. Pluralism, more than one voice, this can often cause difficulties in civilization, even large civilizations in the 20th century. And again, I mentioned in southern Iraq, where the desert has taken over, you can see the outlines of these ancient cities, at least the walls and the temple structures. So let's talk about geography for a moment. This is Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is a fairly open area. It doesn't have natural boundaries, mountain ranges, things like that. The desert, I suppose, is a bit of a barrier, but it's repeatedly invaded and conquered. Desert being the only real natural defense. Of course, you have the Persian Gulf to the south, and you have the fresh water of the Tigris and the Euphrates that flows south into the Gulf. Now, let's talk about Sumerian cosmology for a bit. And cosmology is how people picture themselves, their role in a wider universe. One of the early texts that we have is the Eridu, a Sumerian text. It talks about the creation of the world. It's an origin myth, and of course we've talked about origin myths in here already. Eridu talks about the invention of cities. It talks about the flood. It goes into the creation of the universe and how the gods evolved and how they created mankind to farm and to herd and to worship the gods. Cities and kingship were created, but according to this origin myth, the gods decided to destroy mankind with a flood. And I should emphasize here that this story from Sumeria is much older than the flood story that we have in Genesis with Noah. The counterpart, the Sumerian counterpart to Noah, is Utnapishtim, and we'll give you the spelling on that. He, like Noah, is instructed to build an ark to survive the flood. After the flood, he worshiped before the gods and was given immortality for his godly life. Let's continue with cosmology for a moment. The Epic of Gilgamesh, I mentioned a moment ago. Our first literature, origin myth, flood myth, all contained in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And we'll talk about it in more detail later. Sumerian cosmology, I think we could include the notion of the fragility of human achievement, that humanity has dark and light sides. There's good and evil present. There's a sense of fatalism, having to accept our lot here on earth, acknowledging both the good and the bad. Here you see this as a common motif in cosmologies. You see the Greek myth of Pandora. Remember Pandora's box. She's not supposed to open it. She does and releases evil into the world. You see the same thing in the Garden of Eden in Genesis. Let's continue with cosmology for a moment and talk about religion. It's a polytheistic society, many gods. Syncretistic is a term that religious scholars use and anthropologists use to describe religions that borrow from other faiths and sort of make a big stew and create a new dish here. The sky gods are predominant here in Mesopotamia, which is no surprise since you're surrounded by the desert. Sky gods are male, they're warlike. Earth gods are feminine. Another key term here is animism. Animistic religions, everything is alive, everything has a spirit, shall we say. Cosmology continued. I think it's clear that the ancient Sumerians believed that one of their goals was to bring order out of the chaos of nature. And you see this through the creation of canals and the construction of dikes to try to control the water and to try to create agriculture. I'm going to stop there in this first segment on Sumer. We'll do another segment where we talk specifically about religion and practices in ancient Sumer. Thank you.